go back to a couple of days ago when I described the neti process. The child differentiates itself from its mother, and it arrives some stage in childhood with this clearly defined sense of a self. I am the body. I'm definitely not my mother's body. I'm not the side of the cradle. I'm not the room. I'm not these sounds that are going on. I am this body. So that is the stage that nature develops us up to. And it is the stage that most people stay at. So what we do here is we just carry on that process of differentiating ourselves from our objective experience. And instead of arriving at the stage, I am the body, as opposed to the world, in the infant's experience, it is merged with the world. The child's experience, I am the body, and that then becomes the adult experience. But in this process, we carry on this separating out process until we get back. We separate ourselves from everything that is objective, and we realize, I am awareness. It is not I, the body, that is aware of the world. It is I, awareness, that I'm aware of the body and the world, or the body, the mind, and the world. So the I awareness that is aware of the body, mind, world is not, it's not the separate self. The separate self is the illusory entity that seems to come into existence when awareness mixes itself with the body or with the limitations that belong to the body. So when the limitations that belong to the body are superimposed on awareness, you get this entity called the separate self. The separate self feels conscious or aware, but it also feels limited. The reason it feels conscious or aware is because it is made of consciousness. The reason it feels limited is because the limitations of the body have been superimposed upon it. So the separate self is a mixture of consciousness, the true and only self of pure consciousness, plus the limits of the body. And this creates the illusory entity around whom most people's lives revolve. So, I-awareness is not the separate self. When we continue separating ourselves out from experience, and there is this recognition, I am awareness. And then we ponder the nature of awareness, or rather awareness abides in itself, as itself, and is liberated from the limitations of the body. We arrive at this recognition, I am infinite awareness. I awareness stand alone. I am not mixed with anything other than myself. So this is no longer the separate self. The separate self is the mixture of awareness plus the body. Awareness has separated itself out from the body now. I am pure awareness. By pure, I mean unmixed with the body or the mind. So that is no longer the separate self, but there is still, now coming more specifically to your question, there is still a distinction between awareness and its objects. So the position I am infinite awareness is a position of enlightenment, but there are still objects, or the appearance of objects that seem to be separate and distinct from awareness. So we could call it enlightened duality, in which we have recognized ourselves as infinite consciousness or awareness, but there are still the objects, thoughts, sensations, and perceptions that we are aware of. Yes, and this was what your question was about, this distinction between awareness and its objects, and your question is the awareness that is aware of objects the separate self? Well, it is actually a kind of halfway stage. So what we do in our yoga meditations, and what we were doing this morning, was collapsing the apparent distinction between awareness and its objects. In fact, we're not collapsing the distinction because they were never distinct in the first place. The distinction between awareness and its objects was superimposed on our experience. But it was necessary as a first stage to separate out awareness from the homogeneous mass of experience, which is the infant and the animal's experience. Because without this separating process, there is just experience. There is just the mass of experience. That's the way an animal experiences, or an infant. So there is this separating out process in which we first arrive at the recognition, I am the body. We then take a step back and we realize, I am awareness. And then we take a further step back, I am infinite awareness. So in the state of the infant, consciousness is merged with experience. And through this neti-neti process, consciousness untangles itself from experience. And at some point recognizes its nature. I am infinite awareness. But we then have to look back at the objects from which we have separated ourselves. And this time, instead of consciousness losing itself in experience, as it does in the case of the infant and the animal, this time experience loses itself in consciousness. And the contemplation we did this morning was this. We were affecting this dissolution of experience in consciousness, so that we explored thoughts, sensations, and perception, and we realized they are only consciousness. So in this case, in the case of the infant and the animal, consciousness is merged or lost in experience. And we say, there is only experience. That's the pre-egoic state. Then the ego is separated out. Enlightenment, the recognition of infinite consciousness. And then in the post-enlightenment sadhana, experience is merged in consciousness. So we collapse the distinction between consciousness and its objects again, which seems to share some similarities with the pre-egoic state, but it is instead a post-egoic state. And that is the completion of the recognition of our true nature, not just in the absence of objective experience, but in the midst of objective experience. In both cases, there is only one thing. In the case of the infant, there is only experience. In the case of the one who has recognized their true nature, there is only consciousness. They appear to be the same. It's like two people watching TV. One person says, I see a landscape. Another person says, I see a screen. They're both seeing exactly the same thing, but their interpretation makes one see a landscape and one see a screen. So that is why the self-realization is sometimes likened to the state of a child, because there are similarities, but it's a mistake to think that we are going back to the pre-egoic state of childhood. We're not going back to a pre-egoic state. We are going forwards to a post-egoic recognition. And that is why in the Zen tradition, for instance, they say to begin with, the rivers are rivers and the mountains are mountains. Halfway stage, the rivers are no longer rivers and the mountains are no longer mountains. But then in the last stage, the rivers are rivers again, and the mountains are mountains again. In other words, they look like the first stage. They seem to be identical. But in the first case, the rivers and mountains are made out of stuff called matter. In the last case, they are made out of stuff called consciousness.
Wow, okay. Whoa, all right. So basically, in that meditation, you took us back.
The meditation we started this morning's, well, actually, it was in two parts. The first part of this morning's meditation, we were establishing ourselves as the presence of infinite awareness, being aware of being aware, awareness never leaving itself. I was re-establishing what I essentially am is being aware. And this experience of simply being aware is without limits. Then we visualized the experience of being aware as a space. We added the space-like quality to the experience of being aware. So we feel ourselves as this empty space of awareness. And we first of all started exploring the thoughts appearing in this empty space. And then the closer we explored our thoughts, we actually realized when you really touch the stuff the thought is made of, it's just awareness. All that's there is awareness. And the same when we started moving our fingers. The experience of the body is a vibration appearing in awareness, made of awareness, and likewise the sound and the sight. So although the first part of this morning's meditation was re-establishing the presence of awareness, that was really a prelude for what was to come. The main thrust of this morning's meditation was to see that thinking, sensing, and perceiving are only consciousness itself. In other words, we were collapsing the apparent, we were merging experience in consciousness.
I had never experienced that before, and it's such an intimate experience, and there's not any kind of a me there. It's just experience, yes. And it's just beautiful.